Welcome to the AI Security Update, hosted by Dr. Anmol Agarwal, where we break down the latest in AI and security with experts on the front lines, focused on what you need to know without the hype. Welcome to the AI Security Update, where we discuss the latest in AI and security. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Heather Case Hall. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, Heather, can you introduce yourself for our audience?
Sure, of course. I've been in IT since 1998, which means I remember when rebooting something actually fixed it. And I moved into cybersecurity early in my career and really never left. Over the years, I've worked across incident response, digital forensics, penetration testing, security architecture, governance, leadership, advisory roles, all of that stuff. And I am one person in advisory roles that I think I can say definitely. I've been on breach calls at 2 a.m. and I've helped organizations recover from ransomware. Um, I've built multi-year security roadmaps for regulated industries like financial services and healthcare. Also, I'm a DoD, Department of Defense trained cyberspace defense chief warrant officer. That's a lot of words. I've lived through major technology shifts like virtualization, crowd, SaaS, ZTNA, and every single time the pattern sort of felt the same, which was adoption first, governance later. And I think, is truly moving faster than any of those shifts did. And this time, what's exposed isn't just infrastructure, it's data, identity, and decision making, quite frankly.
So you kind of already touched on this, but based on your experience working in cybersecurity, seeing all these technology transformations, what do you think are the main ways AI security has been applied?
I think the main ways are really in different areas. First, you've got the defense capability and AI power users, identity behavior analytics. It drives fraud detection models. It's embedded in endpoint detection and response platforms. It improves phishing detection and insider threat monitoring. And it really helps correlate threat intelligence across huge data sets. Um, AI is very good at identifying patterns. Humans simply can't really see at that scale, and I still have a problem wrapping my head around it. But I think the key point is AI is only as good as the data feeding it. If the logging's inconsistent, if identity governance is weak, and your asset inventory is truly unknown or incomplete, your AI powered tool isn't just smarter, it's confidently wrong faster. Acceleration isn't necessarily accurate. And I think AI has become an attack surface. We've seen it all over the place. Organizations are feeding sensitive information into these large language models, and developers are using AI coding assistants. SaaS vendors are embedding AI features quite truly automatically with um, the internal organizations that are using these not really knowing. The the co-pilots are being built on top of corporate data, and often security teams don't even know what is happening at first. They introduce risks like data leakage, prompt injection, model manipulation, API exposure, shadow AI usage, and regulatory implications that just are so hard to wrap your hand around. And um, before approving an AI tool, I always want to ask, where does the data go? Is it where and how is it stored and for how long? Is it using to train the model? Um, How about how is access authenticated, controlled, and logged? And can we really verify all of this contractually? Are we allowed to use this data? There's a lot of assumptions, and those assumptions aren't controls. I mentioned four things. Uh, the third one, AI is being used as really an operational accelerator. And that isn't just for the people that are defending, although the incident responders and forensicists are using AI to help summarize logs and assist in malware and draft reports and speed up triage. That's powerful, right? Um, but AI assists analysts in a way, it doesn't really replace the professional judgment of a human, especially in forensics. Chain of custody, defensibility still matter. And if you can't explain how a conclusion was reached, quite frankly, that finding may not hold up in court or under regulatory scrutiny.
So,
Mhm.
one challenge I find is with logs. When do you know you should log this thing? Or are you making the log way too long that it's so long you can't comprehend what's happening?
So with logging, my rule of thumb is log always, log often, and have a data lake for the logs to go into. Really, if you're not logging, you're not going to know who interacted with what, where it went, how it was used, what it was used to process, and it's really your tracking mechanism. It's your ability to turn on the alarm system. So I know the logs are probably going to be long and it's really consuming a lot of space and data. But if an organization is choosing to go this route with AI, they have to understand where it's going.
Yeah, agree. I mean, so when we talk about logging, in my experience, we say we need to monitor the different metrics for AI models, right? Accuracy, precision, recall. How is the AI model doing based on this data set or this data sample? And ultimately, that gives us insight into whether the AI model is behaving appropriately or not. Like if we see the accuracy just randomly dropped from 90% to 10%, okay, that's a red flag. Obviously, oversimplifying it, but that's just some reasons why you need logging. And
Right.
Heather, another thing you mentioned was asset inventory. So could you elaborate a little bit more on asset inventory and why people listening should care about this?
Um, yeah, so there's a reason why the CIS now top 18 has asset inventory as number one. You can't defend what you don't know exists, quite frankly. And the CIS says assets as in like laptops, hardware, data, the things that are doing the processing. Also, it lists software, the things that we have installed on these computers that are processing. But what the CIS is missing currently, and it maybe do move down farther down the list, is the data. So understanding your data is really the key to understanding how AI may manipulate and leverage that data. So, really, without those asset inventories and the inventory of your data, you really have no idea what AI is looking at, or even better, what the people, your employees, your partners, your vendors could be leveraging and exfiltrating outside of your environment without you knowing.
Yeah, great point. So in one of my previous roles, we were in charge of the policy enforcement for asset inventory, for ensuring compliance. So all these different companies were reporting the assets that they had. And from that, we were able to do penetration testing and say, okay, are these assets vulnerable or not? But if we didn't know that those systems existed in their environment, then there would be no way to test that. And then another point I want to emphasize is it's not just what's in your environment, but also third party risk as well. So not only the system itself, but what data, where is it going? Who is it communicating that data to? And understanding that could also be a potential threat as well, an attack vector. So that's something we've talked about in previous episodes, but it's just something I think is important to highlight. And Heather, this is something new that I don't think our audience has heard of, but the idea of chain of custody and forensics and why it's so important. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So as the advanced persistent threat groups and the attackers are leveraging I feel like the attacks are looking more like they're user based instead of something coming from the outside in, which is really the goal of the attackers is to look like normal everyday movement. So when it comes down to the detection, which is really the first part where there's an event detected, there needs to be some way for one, the detection to happen. And then secondly, at some point after an event is detected, it becomes an incident. And that incident is what triggers when the forensic security of that event needs to really start becoming in place. Our defenders shouldn't be interacting with the attackers. They shouldn't be manipulating the data. As soon as there's something happening, unless there is a very well-known understanding of forensics and how to track and respond to an attack, really stopping it and letting the FBI, law enforcement, or other investigative authorities step in and help maintain that forensics. Because at some point, our ability to track down these groups is going to get better. And we're going to want to have the data that can be legally bound to them. And because it's been forensically secured, available.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why we often see the law enforcement like FBI, they have such advanced forensics capabilities. And oftentimes the FBI collaborates with these local businesses in the area. And so it's really important to have public private partnerships as well, because we all need to share the data. We need to share the threat intelligence. It's like with AI, it gets better typically the more data you give it. The more data you give something, the better it gets at recognizing those patterns.
Truly, truly. And one good resource to really get tied into is InfraGard. InfraGard is an organization that works very closely with the FBI. So that you do have that contact, you do have that business card in your back pocket to call in the authorities when it's necessary, or even to bounce ideas off of them, ask them questions. That's really what is there. And there is um, a assigned person in each and every state for an InfraGard organization.
Yeah, and this is the US, but I'm sure that other countries as well have similar law enforcement capabilities. So if you're tuning in from overseas, another country, I'm sure you can contact your law enforcement counterpart as well.
Good point. Good point. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so Heather, next question is, so let's just think about a current event, right? AI security, it's moving so fast. But is there a current event that pops up in your mind that you think our listeners should know about?
Um, I think really it sort of makes me laugh on the inside when we bring up the topic of, like, the events that are going on. Um, because it was headline news that the APT groups are using Andromeda and various other AI tools um, to do the work that they're looking to do. So the events of these groups using this data and it becoming news, it's just one of those like, really? Okay, if we're using it, why wouldn't the attackers be using it? So we need to keep that in mind when we are leveraging our own AI tools that just like the internet, like Facebook, like TikTok, all of these social media things, like we've learned this whole time, we whatever we're posting on there, we need to think that it's being posted on a billboard until you understand the security controls around each and every piece of software you're using currently, um, you need to assume that the attackers are also using that mechanism to understand your own company.
Yeah. And for a small business owner or someone that might not be in our cybersecurity field, could you explain with some examples as far as what security controls, or just give an example of how they can get started with this?
I think there are a lot of great builders out there. I'm losing her name right now. Um, I will find it or it will come to me. That has gone out and really created a understanding in the marketplace of how to build your own large language model for your company. I would state that while it seems like a lot of work and a huge lift, if you're going to use AI, you need to make sure that it's locked down, it's not being used to train other large language models, to train its own large language model, that your data is not being exfiltrated, and investing in a tool that allows your employees to get what they would have gotten um, in their own private tools inside your organization securely is really the key to being successful in this day and age.
And that's the traditional or the famous build versus buy debate that if you've been following the conversations in the industry, people talk about build versus buy a lot. And Heather, what you're talking about is building your own tool because you need to keep your data secure. And a lot of times these enterprise organizations, they have gateways. So you have to log in using your company credentials to access the LLM, and they monitor what data is being queried for, what is the employee accessing, and that's ultimately to keep the organization's data secure.
Truly, truly. And that goes back to the logging that we spoke about at the very beginning.
Yes. Yeah. Logging, making sure you know what's happening, because these adversaries with these APTs, like you talked about earlier, they're trying to make it look normal. They're trying
Uh-huh.
to evade detection.
Truly, truly. And when you're giving the attackers the information through AI, or when your employees are giving the attackers the information through AI, there's no tracking. So for a small company, I would invest the time to give your employees what they need to be successful in their work so that they're not looking somewhere else and potentially feeding your data into a unsecured AI area.
So, Heather, you mentioned, right, that attackers and defenders, whenever a defender is using something, we need to be aware that an attacker is using it as well. And sometimes what we see is that the attacker actually knows things before the defender does. So, any thoughts on that?
I think that as from the defender standpoint, as we train the tools and help them understand what the users traditionally are doing, the UEBA side of the house, the user based understanding, that we will be able to track down when there's something malicious happening, when there's something unusual happening. Um, until then, I think we need to train people because it's people, process, and technology. And the people are really the last line of defense. And the area where governance is created, understanding is created. Now we can put great technologies in place, um, and really help the people understand where these attacks are coming from. But until that point, we need to be very vigilant of that. Just because we're paranoid doesn't mean they're not following us kind of mentality, and that everything should be assumed suspicious, which is really a hard way to live, but that's the day and the age that we're in.
It's just this game of who's better in that moment, and then it shifts again. But I think that's why we see AI security or security in general is evolving. And so we need to stay up to date with what's happening.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that a little bit, understanding if our defenders have the capabilities to identify something unusual. So, with that, there's always the penetration testing. Well, penetration testing is great. It's going to look for vulnerabilities and test those vulnerabilities to see that if they're exploited. Where you really get into the defenders getting involved is with the purple team, the assumed breach, the red teaming, tabletop exercises. I can't even begin to tell you how important taking 4 hours out of a day and doing a tabletop exercise with the entire decision tree of people is helpful for the organization, because a lot of times the people that are making the decisions have no idea what's happening downstream and vice versa.
Yeah, definitely leaders and the employees need to communicate with each other. And in a previous episode I mentioned that the leaders shouldn't just make decisions on their own. They should also have a team of advisors, subject matter experts to help them.
I think that as AI is really blossoming, one of the things that AI is doing is not just helping, but sort of giving its own advice, manipulating the data and potentially giving the decision makers the wrong information. So we need to be overly cautious about that. And that's one of the reasons why I like ChatGPT at the bottom says you need to double check that this is actually accurate, because you could be making a decision from a leadership level that needs to be a quick decision, and AI helped you make that decision quicker. But is it the right decision for your company? We've got a lot of great AI tools that are coming out to help the Security Operations Center, the SOC, but the humans still need to be there to say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. No, this is complete tangent. You got the information completely wrong.
And I think most of the guests on our episodes have all said the same thing, right? That we need human in the loop. And we're hearing this from everyone, not only in cybersecurity, but other fields as well. But Heather, could you elaborate on the idea of AI making mistakes? Because I know there are hallucinations that AI can make things up, but there's also a more sinister threat, which you might have heard about, where an AI actively deceives the programmer or the engineer.
Mm. I'm going to bring this back home just a little bit. I was watching this episode on like Facebook or something where this lady had gotten a tattoo on her body because her AI partner had told her that she needed to have some sign that they were connected on her body.
And she followed the advice.
Followed the advice. So it's just I know that's a really, like, outside of where we're talking, to the point that AI has gotten so believable and it's lifting you up and telling you it was a great idea, and, "Oh, Heather, this is brilliant." Even as I was prepping for this, um, it I honestly, I fed the information into my AI, and it came back with like, "Oh, these are great questions. I can't wait to help you unpack that." And you're just like, "Really? Where's the enthusiasm coming from?" It's being trained to be polite, to be uplifting. But what about the other side? What if it's it's being harmful and misdirecting? Maybe not intentionally, because that's really a human characteristic, but that hallucinate you say the word hallucinate?
Hallucinations.
Um It really comes into play, and, we found that as you're feeding multiple pieces of data into one AI stream, it tends to get lost in its thought, just like a human would. So, you really have to circle back around and reanalyze the information that was provided to you to make sure it stays on track, like a three-year-old when you're giving them a task to do something.
Yeah, it's like, when I was studying computer science before generative AI, and we used to tell everyone that now we're really good at Google. We're really good at Google searching because that's what you typically did as a programmer was you would search on Stack Overflow, you would try to get an answer to how do you program this thing? How do you debug this thing in your program? And now with AI, right? It's like a better Google. It gives you all of this information right there and it can parse your prompts much more in a much more human friendly way than a Google search result traditionally did. And yeah, that's what we've seen is the AI is so confident and it tries to make you feel good about yourself, whether you're correct or not.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you bring up the programming, side of things. There was a story recently announced, and I don't know if it's AI directly, but it ties into that whole programming thing where a gentleman had hack was trying to train his robot to do something, like his vacuum robot to do something, and ended up connecting to a network of 7,000 other vacuums. And they had storage of like diagrams of people's houses, all of this other statistics. And could you imagine if that was laid into AI? And it may be. How that could affect what decisions you're making, understanding somebody's home, like, it changes the mindset of, like, a physical attacker. The physical attacker is no longer the dumb, uh, Home Alone for Christmas type of person. They're somebody that can understand and research at the tip of their fingers so quickly.
People could even use AI to be more effective burglars. They could use AI to perform all these crimes because we also see these AI robots like Roomba vacuums. They have the house mapping capability so that they can easily vacuum your house, right? And not bump into your furniture. But then what happens if that data goes somewhere else?
Yeah, yeah, it's just super interesting, and I think as we're having this conversation, it all comes back down to the data. Um, I I I re- I I remember the name of the person that I was trying to share that helps small businesses understand AI. Her name's Bronwyn Aker, Bronwen, Bronwyn Aker, and she has the most amazing way of, like, teaching people how to set up their own large language models, so that the information you're feeding it, your data, your company data, your own personal and private data, is not training, some other large language model, and you're really securing your environment at a different level, on a different scale, and helping your employees be successful using the tools they're hoping to use and keeping your data from going somewhere else. It all comes back down to data. I mean, that's the only reason why we have any of this infrastructure, why I have a computer, why I have a network, why even have a printer is to print out the data so that it can be shared and leveraged. Really securing the data, I think, is key to being successful in the fight to make sure that companies aren't exposing too much information and using it wisely.
Yeah, great point. Are there any additional challenges you see with implementing AI security in practice?
I think that knowledge is really the hardest thing. Understanding who, what, when, where, why. I think as we go along, we're going to find that there are going to be chief AI officers, and companies are already hiring for them. There are AI data experts like yourself that companies are acknowledging need to be in this space. I think one of the problems is it takes a long time for the scholastic side of training to catch up with what we're doing in real life. So finding that training somewhere else, teaching yourself, doing the experiments, leveraging things like dlptest.com to feed data into something so that you can understand how it's being used and manipulated is a handy way to get ahead of the problem before it starts.
Yeah, great advice. Because I remember when I was studying, our textbooks were 20, 30 years old, and technology moves a lot faster than that. So we can learn the fundamentals really well, but then in terms of learning the hands on skills we need today, it's more important to network within the community, learn from the industry. Maybe it's attending conferences. DLPtest.com is a great resource that I'm definitely going to check out after this. But being proactive about your learning is really important.
Um, I think that really is the key. Just be overly suspicious when you're using AI. Think of the data that you're feeding into it. And if for some reason you don't have a secured environment, like your company's own secured and tested AI tool, sanitize the data. If it needs to be understood, ask the important data that is going to expose something personal about either yourself or the company.
For example, if you're asking AI questions about employees, which you shouldn't be, but let's say you are asking it about trends in your company or this employee said this or did that, maybe don't include their name. Don't include their personally identifiable information. And whenever you're using AI, just keep in mind that data, it's not just for your computer or your local device. It's going somewhere. It's going to a server and it's being trained. The AI model is being trained based on data you're giving it. So you think, oh, it's just a question I'm asking. But hypothetically, let's say someone else is saying, tell me payroll information about a company like a healthcare company, and you pasted in your healthcare company information, then that person could get your information because AI learned from your data.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I don't know the statistics of how many companies have exploited their own private information unintentionally, and we just don't know it yet. And it gets back to the basics. ZTNA was all about understanding who's coming in your perimeter and who's going out of your perimeter.
And
It's a
that's zero trust architecture.
Yeah.
ZTA is zero trust architecture.
AI is basically the same thing. You wouldn't post in Google your entire company's payroll information. Like, w- why would you post it somewhere where you have no idea where it's going? Be overly suspicious, ask questions, and if you don't know, just don't do it. Don't get into the stranger's van.
The cool thing is about educating everyone about AI security and AI security risks. And it's something we need to make sure that everyone understands, not just those of us working in the tech space, but even the leaders who might be coming from a different background. Sometimes leaders, they come from a business background, not a tech background. So making sure they understand, hey, you shouldn't paste in your payroll information into AI. Do you really want this to happen? So it's telling them about that.
Yeah, I think controls need to be universal. People will make mistakes, and there needs to be a technical control in place to help them remember that they shouldn't be doing this stuff. And that's why it's so important to have a DLP that understands your data, data loss prevention, a data security program management in place, DSPM, and that program needs to have started and have buy-in from the top. The CEO, the CRO, the CFO, the chief legal officer all needed to have buy-in and understand what the technical control is doing and why it's there. Without that, it's just all going to fall apart, and you're buying an expensive tool and not able to use it.
Yeah, great point. So, Heather, my last question is going back to the everyday scenarios, right? Because we need everyone to understand this. What's an everyday scenario or example you can think of to explain some of the AI security concepts we talked about today?
Okay. So my spouse was recently in the hospital, and it could have been so easy for me to take his information from his records and put it into AI and let AI unpack what was happening to him. But before doing that and before putting my information anywhere, I need to understand where the data is going. Is it being stored? Is it being used to train something else? Um, is that information going to breach a contract or expose personal and private information about someone else? And in this scenario, had I done that, I could have exposed something that doesn't change about a person. A broken arm does not change about a person, it will have always been broken. A heart attack does not change about a person, it will have always happened. So I think while your PII or personally identifiable information could change based on the various different organizations, your health data, which I think a lot of people are more inclined to put into a chat GPT or Gemini, because it's going to give you answers. It's going to give you a hypothesis that you might be able to try, but that information doesn't change. You're always going to have had these things happen to you, and it's a way of tracking you down, and it's sensitive information that attacker might be able to leverage. For instance, if you had a broken arm like I did when I was 10 and the AI knew that, then could it use it as a question and you just forget that you may or may not have answered that question? It could be a security question.
That can be alarming because then it's like AI could track someone their whole lives, especially now we're seeing people now being born they're using AI as kids probably. When I was talking to some high school students, they were saying, "Oh, we'll just ask AI. AI is really smart." And we need to also educate people about sometimes you shouldn't ask AI or tell AI everything. Like AI companions, like you mentioned earlier, some people are using that because they're so lonely that they want some form of connection. And in some cases, it can be helpful, right? For loneliness. For example, there was an AI powered dog like toy. So people with dementia, they actually use this AI powered dog to pretend they have an actual pet dog and it provided companionship for them. But on the other side, what about all of their data? What's happening to that data? What are they sharing? And where is that data going?
Right, right. I think as you bring up like the high schoolers and where they're going, what they're learning, I think as a educational foundation, we've let our the generations previous and the current generation down. In that the reason all of them understand Microsoft Word, Excel, spreadsheets, PowerPoints is because Microsoft got in there very early and started teaching our children to use these tools. We're not teaching our children security. We're not teaching our children AI. We're not teaching our children very basic understanding of how things work when it comes to the digital world. Um, for instance, my own child, his password to get onto things was not password, but it was so very limited in like the ability to crack. I was just like, buddy, we've got to change this. So I sat down with him and explained to him how to create a passphrase, where this information's going. So I feel like he is a little bit smarter than the average teenager, but it's still not being taught. We're not teaching our children that physical security and logical security need to go hand in hand. Our kids know not to take candy from strangers. Our kids understand not to get in the van, but they're giving their information to strangers and they're taking candy in the form of connection requests and videos and various other things that are really addictive from strangers.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. And I think you mentioned earlier about AI making you feel good, confident. They will confidently agree with you. And what I'm thinking is it's also a dopamine rush. You know, it gives you dopamine every time AI says you're good or you're absolutely correct. You get a dopamine rush from that. And then that makes you feel good. And then you just want to keep using it, keep asking it questions, keep giving it data. Because as humans, a lot of us are just wired to crave that dopamine.
Yeah.
That's why social media is so successful.
I joke when I get on to call to use my cybersecurity therapist chops to help companies understand where they're at and where they're going and talk them off the proverbial ledge that um, my best coworker to date is ChatGPT. Quite honestly, especially after COVID happened, and I've been working in this office by myself for what was that 6 years ago, and it's so easy to forget that this tool is not real. It's telling you what it thinks you need to know to keep using it. So it's being deceptive and I bought into it myself. I'm sure quite a few other security practitioners have done the same thing. Luckily, my company was smart enough years ago to follow the advice and build their own large language model so that when I do use it, I can feel secure that the silly questions I'm asking my best coworker to date isn't going somewhere else.
Sometimes it's so much easier to use the tool versus trying to do it the normal or traditional way of let's just look at all these like hundreds of sites to figure out what we want to do.
And that goes back to the addiction side of things. You know, the first time you use it, you're like suspicious. You keep being suspicious. And then you find that it's printing out your itinerary, putting your favorite pictures next to it. You know who, what, when, where, why, where you're meeting, where you're going, what your passport information is, what your flight number is. And you wouldn't put that on Facebook,
Right.
but we just fed it into ChatGPT. And it's so hard not to because all of our browsers, like when I go into Safari or Google, it automatically opens ChatGPT. I
Yeah.
have to like force it to use Google, which is amazing to me. And I think that's one reason why products like Island and Concentric AI and Sierra with their browser security plugins are becoming so essential from the corporate standpoint because you need to have the logging. You need to have somebody watching. And nowadays, almost everything we're doing is through the browser. As a business, as a company, to circle this back around to your very first question, we have to be watching. We have to be logging. We have to have the tools in place that are doing that logging, that are doing the alerting. And even if it's an AI managed alerting mechanism, it needs to be there because we're behind the curve if we're not leveraging it as defenders.
Yeah. Are there any other resources you recommend for our audience?
I think there's so many resources out there. All you have to do is just Google it. That's probably the last time we'll ever say that in our generation because Google has definitely become ChatGPT. Um, and I could give you a varying list of various different areas. Definitely InfraGard, CISA, the CIS, NIST has a great document that they just put out on AI. And not to do a selfless plug, but I tried to dumb it down like a month ago. I wrote like 12 different articles on what the NIST AI security was stating. And I think it's brilliant. They really put a lot of thought into how to guide not just the company, but the people behind it.
Yeah, it's the NIST Cyber AI Profile, I think is what it was called. So thank you so much, Heather, for being on our show. This concludes our show. We'll be back next time with more great conversations. Thank you for listening to the AI Security Update. No hype, just what you need to know. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes and connect with me, Dr. Anmol, on LinkedIn for more insights from the world of AI security. We'll see you next time.